Welcome to the Climate and Coordination RCAST, where every week we'll be discussing topics related to all things climate change and RChain's role in the solution. We will be discussing technologies that can adapt and coordinate massive amounts of data like never before, forming social architectures that grow collective intelligence, sharing and evaluating data planetarily, all while maintaining personal privacy and personal data ownership. A new decentralized economy is forming as we move from the third industrial revolution, digitization, to the fourth, decarbonization. By building a co-op, built on a correct by construction, concurrent, scalable solution, RChain is structured to build out the new technology that will be required for a flourishing regenerative planet. Please join us on this journey.
Okay, welcome everyone to this week's Climate and Coordination RCAST. We're very happy to be able to continue discussing topics about technology and innovation and nature and everything else. And Daryl, I'm going to now turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Nora. So as you know, some of you might know that I recently purchased an Oculus Quest 2 to get an idea of where the consumer level of VR is at. And one of the apps that I checked out is this app called Ecosphere. And let's see, here's some info about them. Ecosphere is an award-winning nature documentary series that sets to redefine the limits of 3D 180-degree cameras and natural history filmmaking, produced by Foria in partnership with Worldwide Fund for Nature, WWF, and Silverback Films and Oculus. And it says, venture into the wildest places on Earth where Indigenous and community-led efforts are creating space for humanity and wildlife to thrive together. Explore the great savannas of Kenya, the ancient jungles of Borneo, and the rich coral reefs of Raja Ampat. Meet elephants, orangutans, manta rays, and some incredible humans, all in stunning cinematic footage filmed from the air to the ocean. So the Ecosphere app is created by a company called Foria. And here's a bit about Foria. So Foria is a world-leading immersive tech studio that specializes in cutting-edge virtual, augmented, and mixed reality technology. With a globally recognized team of developers, creatives, and partners, Foria are on a mission to transform human experiences and augment intelligent environments. We create powerful user interactions and social experiences, all with the goal to generate a positive impact on the world. Okay, so I checked this app out. I clicked on it, and so when you launch the app, you get this nice 3D image of Earth that you can rotate with your controller. It really kind of compels you in, and you kind of instantly get this kind of calm, relaxed feeling. The music's great, and so then I zeroed in on Kenya and clicked, and it opened up with this episode called Grasslands Africa. And it starts with like a drone flyover view of some grasslands with cattle farmers. You're kind of flying above. Then you're standing in front of an elephant, and it's quite dramatic in VR. Then all of a sudden, a man teleports in front of you, a man named Raphael Tumati, whose family has been cattle farmers from generations. Like the animals, they travel across the savannas following the rains. And it feels like you're standing right there with him, and he's talking directly at you. And you really get a sense of his gentle, kind spirit. Then it goes to a scene with several baboon families in the midst of some elephants. And he's talking about how things changed when they became landowners and many people settled on the land. Then you're a drone flying above what looks like a grassland village with nondescript rectangular buildings, and a narrator states that by 2050, the population is expected to grow by more than 1 billion people, putting pressure on Africa's wild areas and its wildlife. And then it talks about the elephants. Every year they travel between Kenya and Tanzania seeking food and a mate. And then another man teleports in front of you, David DeBalin, head of field operations of Save the Elephants. And he talks about how elephants are the architects of the grasslands. By spreading seeds, they create the trees. And it's a matriarchal system. The mother is the guide. They have amazing detection abilities to know when rain is coming. So over 20 years of tracking the elephants, they know the travel corridors. And because of increased human population and poaching, they've shrunk from over 1 million in 1981 to just 100,000 today. And here's a quote from David DeBallant. I'm really hopeful that in the future, there'll be a greater balance between wildlife and people. So the next episode is about this amazing woman named Naomi Leshangoro, the first female elephant keeper in East Africa. And she's head of this elephant sanctuary. They rescue orphaned elephants, then nurse them to the age where they can set them free. Without elephants, the landscape doesn't work, she says. And so there was something about viewing this in VR and the style of the filmmaking that gave me a deeper sense of experience of being there with the person. I was so blown away by this intimate experience that I felt the need to reach out to the creators of this production. So I reached out and heard back from their director, this guy named Joseph Purdam. And here's a bio about him. He's an award-winning XR producer, director, using our ever-evolving mediums of storytelling to share the narrative of our planet and its inhabitants. Joseph's aim is to expand our understanding and empathy through immersive content and experiences, enabling a deeper connection to our planet, its wildlife, and our people. The overarching goal is to show us all as we are, one. It was just great making a connection with the actual director of this production. And so I am happy to say that he is here with us as our guest. So welcome, Joseph.
Thanks, Daryl. Thanks for having me. And I really appreciate the kind words. I'm glad that Ecosphere was impactful for you.
It really was. And it's also been really, really cool getting to know you, because we've had like 2 or 3 conversations now. And it's just been, just really great kind of hearing your stories and what you've been up to and the why of what you're doing. And yeah, it's inspiring. I mean, I want to hear more about just, you've traveled all over the world. You've met all these people. I just love to kind of hear more about your stories, because I mean, the stories that you tell with film are compelling. And so I'm sure there's more background to that.
Yeah, of course. I guess the foundation of Ecosphere was really around putting community stories at the front and center of conservation. So often conservation can be a little bit of a white savior complex, and it can be kind of this, especially in Australia, there's a tendency to go into communities where Western systems have created problems and go in with Western solutions and not really ask what the community would like to do. And communities often have the answers to their own problems, and broader than that, often have the answers to the problems that are adjacent to them. And I think at the forefront of the storytelling structure and the way that we wanted to build these narratives was always the people within the communities that were doing the work. And we were incredibly fortunate to partner with Silverback off the bat. We'd worked with them on a project prior to that called Rewild, which was a really groundbreaking social AR conservation experience that we did in partnership with Netflix and Google and WWF alongside the Our Planet series. So that was like a David Attenborough conservation series that launched on Netflix, I think in 2019. And so we'd been working with Silverback on that project, and they dipped their toe in the water with VR before, but hadn't really been convinced as to its efficacy, and it didn't really scale that well with the types of productions that they ran. So they were apprehensive, but very supportive, and they're pioneers in their own fields, and so they understood our sort of pioneering spirit of wanting to go and shoot in 3 countries, shoot 3 stories in under a year, do all the posts, get it. They take 5 years to make a production, so they thought we were crazy. But they came on board and really helped us build these narratives off the back of some of the amazing work and research that they'd done. And we managed to shape really impactful stories. I believe that, I think the most important part is that it really put these beautiful animals and the people that care for them front and center.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just it was just a really great experience. And I'm just kind of like, my thoughts about VR are that, it's inevitable. It's coming to the masses. The Oculus Quest 2, is kind of perhaps, the first actual compelling consumer product. It's like $350 US, and it's well worth the money, in my opinion. There's so much to experience in VR, and I think the Oculus kind of delivers it. And in a previous RCAST, I was talking about just Apple's plans in mixed reality, and how they're planning on rolling out a product in 2022. It looks like that will likely be kind of like Apple's solution to the Quest 2, much smaller, interface, just probably much more sexy and Apple-like, and so in many ways, like new mediums like this, a lot of it gets defined by the norms of those who kind of get started using it in the beginning. And it kind of, norms can be very powerful. And if you can establish, norms of, companies like yourself, with the goals of generating a positive impact on the world, then, hopefully VR will kind of, take on more of that trajectory. Because there's also a lot of, very terrifying and evil things that can happen with VR as well.
No doubt. I mean, that's almost what keeps me in the industry, is that it's an opportunity, but it's also somewhat of a responsibility, I feel, for people that have a good understanding of the tools and have the skill set to pursue sort of the more protopian outcome, I think. And protopian is this term which comes from Monica Bielski and an amazing team around her that really looks at the middle road between utopia and dystopia. And utopia and dystopia tend to be these fetishized sci-fi versions of, the overlords either become benevolent and we work out a solution to sustainable, limitless energy, or we kind of cook the planet, which would seem to be our current trajectory. And protopian future sort of imagines this idea where we can, have real, diverse, community-led action, which I think ties really nicely into, your and Greg and Nora and your team's approach to blockchain. I think is actually really like, how do we create a voice for global communities to establish what we want as a future for our planet? And I really align with that in terms of, I think, what we're trying to do in the VR and AR and MR. So we position ourselves as an XR company because we do work across that spectrum, but this technology has such an incredible power for communicating complex problems, and for, I think most importantly, providing people with really present, embodied, felt sense experiences, which I think is something that we disconnect from a lot. If you work in a city and you work in an office and you live in an apartment, and your exposure to the natural world that's so deeply under threat is minimal. And even, as amazing as the work that 2D documentary, as amazing as like Silverback and BBC and all the stories that they tell are phenomenal, and the footage that they capture is mind-blowing, but there is a degree of removal. And even talking to the crew that work on things like Our Planet, they're like, yeah, that goes out on Netflix, and then 9 out of 10 families are probably on 3 devices while that's on. And there is something really special about the power of VR to bring you right into that present moment and to help you feel embodied. And some of the behavioral science studies that we've done surrounding some of our VR work has had participants come out the other end of the experience, saying, I fed the penguins, or I went there. It's not this like, I watched this thing in VR type language. It's really embodied, present, felt sense language, which I feel is the difference. And so, yeah, I guess I feel kind of a responsibility that this technology be used for, the the white mirror outcome, because that show's done a very good job, Black Mirror, of illustrating what happens if we don't take some pretty big strides towards positive outcomes instead of letting things run their course, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. I think yeah, the norms are ours to form. The norms are ours to form. But so
everything that rhymes is true, right?
If you talk to a lyricist, yeah. I'm just like, what was I going to say now? I forgot what I was going to say. It was something about the compelling nature of VR, and just kind of like the idea of how, you're watching a 2D video on Netflix, and you and your family members are all on different devices, and we live in such an ADD world, and we're all becoming more ADD. And I do think that the VR experience, just from the moment you put it on, it's calming. There's something about it. I don't know, maybe it's the design of the architecture of the Oculus specifically. I don't know, but the music and just kind of just the sense of focus that you get the moment you put it on is it kind of helps you calm down and kind of be immersed in something. And there's something really exciting and attractive about that.
All right. So maybe to build on that just a touch, there's in the experiences that are ahead of us, the ones that we're in the process of forming at the moment and doing a lot of pre-production on, we're really focusing on that experience as you come into the headset and as you come into the application, and tools that we can build to actually like bring you in touch with your breath and bring you in touch with the tactility of hand tracking, and place you in the environment with a real groundedness. That it's interesting because you get mixed reviews throughout different industries and from different people around the insular nature of VR. People tend to feel that, that some people feel really safe and really calm and enjoy that insular nature, and they do find it focusing. And other people feel a little bit, isolated and disconnected, or they feel unsafe potentially because they can't see what's happening outside that world. So it has a lot to do with, I think, setting and where you're using that device. But as public use of VR, I think normalizes. I mean, it's a pretty perfect thing to get you to drop into a space, and we've done a lot of work in that intersection of mindfulness and VR, and there's so much there. We're partnered with a local university called Swinburne, and they're doing amazing work with basically building a free online mental health platform, which they have been doing really successfully for a little while. We're now working with them to build like a free online VR component to that, so that people in headsets will be able to download VR mindfulness experiences that are backed by a decade of mindfulness science and digital health science, but free, open source. Anyone can download it on any device basically and drop into that space.
That's cool. Yeah, I first heard about VR back in the 80s, and I believe it was this magazine called Mondo 2000. And it was a magazine based out of San Francisco, and it was full of like kind of crazy techno hippies who were like super into LSD and psychedelics and technology. This guy named Are You Serious, I think, was like the founder of the magazine. And there were multiple articles about VR and interviews with the originator of the term, Jaron Lanier. And it seems like early VR experimenters were quite into that. They're into like psychedelics and exploring and pushing the boundaries of human feeling and perception. And Jaron Lanier, himself is, I've been a fan ever since, and I followed his career. I actually ended up meeting him one day He's an amazing person. And it's interesting because the conversation we had when I met him, we talked about elephants, strangely enough. And so anyway, I just, I kind of like where VR has come from, that kind of space of kind of um, pushing the boundaries of human experience and that kind of the background of it. So I'm wondering if you know or know about much about the origins of VR.
I don't know as much as I wish I did about the origins. Unfortunately, I mean, I know that it's definitely always aligned with that space of sort of expanded cognition, and I mean, the like stereography is such an interesting thing as well, because that's been done for, you know, decades and decades, right back to like stereographs of those original sort of like wood and glass little apparatus where you could have a single stereo image. That would have been mind-blowing, you know, 60, 70 years ago.
So Daryl, you probably don't know this, but I actually worked with Kim Fairchild, who did SimNet on the first silicon graphics machines that supported the computational power necessary to do it. This is back in the 80s, the late 80s. I worked with Kim Fairchild. I also worked with Alan Wexelblatt, who later found his way from the research institution where we were to the Media Lab at MIT. He was the editor for the collection software. Actually, I was the one that came up with that little pun, which was the title of his book. So I worked with, and also Kim and Alan worked with Andy Trigg, who did the first artificial reality toolkit. And in fact, what got me started down the path of looking at concurrency so much was realizing that there was no way that sequential machines were going to have the compute power necessary to support real AI, AR kinds of computations distributed around the globe. So I started looking at concurrency very early on to see what could be done to help and support those kinds of implementations. So yeah, I knew a lot of the people in the early AR stuff. I couldn't engage it myself because the frame rates would make you nauseous.
Right. Yeah.
That was one of the big issues with the like Oculus DK2 was, you know, one of the first, DK1 and DK2 was, you know, some of the first headsets that made sort of more democratized VR. I mean, they weren't developer kits, but they did make VR a little bit more democratized. You just needed a decent GPU and there are a few experiences there, but, you know, it was like a roller coaster experience that was, you know, pretty blocky and ran at like 20 frames, and it just made people so sick. That's when I think we really started to discover a lot of like how far we would have to go, and it's just been lucky that GPU technology has sort of exponentially expanded in the last few years and catered for so much of that. But it was interesting when you were talking about maybe not to talk so much about the history, but I think the path ahead of us. It's really interesting talking about Apple's approach, and, you know, as cloud rendering and cloud computing gains more and more traction globally, it'll be interesting to see what role that plays, I think, in the democratization of like much lighter weight headsets and even off-board rendering just on a device. So you might have an iPhone with their new chip doing all of your VR rendering, and then be able to have a really, really lightweight set of glasses which can do real world MR. So I think that's a really interesting, I guess, intersection of that like cloud compute space and the AR VR world. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that, Greg, and whether you think that will sort of proliferate.
I mean, we're entering a phase where we're seeing the end of the hegemony of the sort of big fat instruction set. So as a result, we're going to see massive volatility in the processor space, and a lot of what's going to drive the next evolution is AR and VR implementations and desires to increase our ability to communicate in that regard. Yeah, I think it's a very interesting field. I find, however, a lot of reluctance because I worry so much. While all of this is happening, it's at the same time that Apple releases screen time notifications, right? Because people are spending so much time in the digital world and so little time in the physical world, and I think so much of the problems that we're facing in terms of climate is because people really haven't deepened and cultivated their connection with the natural world. And to the extent that AR and VR can support that process of deepening the connection to the natural world, that's great. But to the extent that it's just sucks people more into into a kind of digital experience, which is a far removed from the richness of life, I think is worrisome. I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it's something I think about a lot, really. And I think that we have to look at these technologies as a means to an end, as a vehicle to that reconnection. I think if we look at them as the destination, it's really dangerous. I mean, a past partner of mine who worked in social work and human rights law was always adamantly came back to the thought that if she's doing a job right, she's trying to put herself out of a job. And I feel like that rings true in our industry, is that, if I do my job right, I shouldn't have a job in 5 or 10 years, because what we're doing is, hopefully heading to a place where we don't need VR to connect with nature anymore, because that is a standard practice. But at the moment, as you say, like we're a little bit lost as a global community, I feel. And there is an incredible power within these technologies to reconnect us to the importance of story and the importance of place. And I think that, no one has a sense of that better than First Nations people, in the way that story is tied to place, and, place exists in this non-linear format of time where sort of story comes out of place. And Tyson Yunkaporta, who's an Australian author, writes so beautifully about this in his book Stand Talk. And I'm sure I'll butcher it in paraphrasing, but really, like that concept of bringing people back into what he would call the right story, into understanding their place on the planet, their connection to it, and how to relate as a custodial species to this planet, I think that's the role of VR through my eyes, is that it's a vehicle to reconnect to that place. And that is, that's the sole focus for me and a lot of my team, really, is that if we can use these tools to help facilitate that transition back into a state of custodianship, then, the technology has served about like a valid and valuable purpose. But I think with anything that has that power for good, it also does have that power to, be a bit of an escape and a bit of a trap. And I think that really, while we exist in a society where there's where this digital escapism and numbing is so sought after, and we don't actually have conversations around what we're escaping from and what we're numbing and why, there is always going to be this danger. And you see it with the industries that, I'd be very surprised if there was a vertical that generated more revenue in VR than the porn industry, or an industry that had put more into R&D than the military in VR. So there are always these adjacent factors that have the potential to sort of railroad or dilute the efficacy and impact of these types of technologies. But they're also funding development of hardware and tech that allows us then to tell more impactful stories. So yeah, it's always a tricky balance, isn't it? I think that wherever there's the potential for good, humans will probably take that technology and exploit it and overconsume it to a degree, and then we'll need I know a network of incredible creators and technologists and thinkers around the world. People like Robin, who's one of the co-founders of Marshmallow Laser Feast, and his partner, who do amazing work in the immersive space, connecting people back to place and back to nature through, you know, incredible technical executions. They're based over in the UK, and you know, there's a lot of people that are using this technology to really create that sense of wonder and connection, and bring us all home back to that feeling of connectedness. So I think there's a bright future for it. But yeah, while we're in a growth-based, like capital dominant society, there's always going to be a huge susceptibility to corrupt that, the power of tools like this. And I mean, it's a conversation that I'm sure you guys would run across very frequently. Is, you know, AI is this incredible tool, machine learning, incredible fields, but if you don't trust the people behind them, then, you know, if you don't trust the people behind the creation of these tools or the application, then they can be incredibly dangerous and destructive. So I hope that it serves as a platform for us to start having conversations around, you know, the power that the huge tech companies wield, and the people defining the trajectory of these technologies. Really, like, we need to trust their ethics and their values. There needs to be ways to really have open conversations about, you know, what behavior a self-driving car chooses to take if it's going to hit someone or kill the driver, and, you know, what can be published in VR and what can be published on the gaming front that, you know, starts. So I guess we're getting to the free speech space pretty quickly, but I think that we just need to prioritize people over capital, and start implementing that in systems like VR and shape that trajectory.
I have a question.
Please.
I was wondering if your Ecosphere app, unfortunately, I haven't gotten a chance to try it, but I would really love to try it, and I hope that I will. I was wondering if it's meant to be an experience that you sort of sit down and or stand in one place, or is it an experience that you're encouraged to sort of move around, you know, within your physical space while you have the Oculus on? And also, just in addition to that, I was curious if you feel there was something about VR that was necessary for the project that you did, if there was something in that was needed to convey the message.
Yeah, good questions. The Ecosphere is more of a seated experience. We were working really closely with Facebook on it, and they had good data around where, like, how people actually consume media like this. And I mean, the seated experience, I think, leads to a little bit more of that feeling of safety and comfort, and being 180 VR, not 360, you don't have to look behind you. So it is, like, quite comfortable to watch seated. It's semi-interactive. So really what it's doing is sort of bridging that space from the gaming world into the media world. And the menu system is fully interactive, and the future iterations, seasons that we're doing of Ecosphere and some adjacent projects, we are building in much more agency and interactivity. But this was sort of setting more of a, it was built to break some tech boundaries, and sort of be a best-in-class VR 180 showcase for the Oculus Quest headsets. And, you know, we chose to build that story heavily around conservation, environmental conservation, and community conservation stories. But really, first and foremost, it was supposed to be, I guess, an example of the power of the technology in a media sense out of that traditional gaming world, which I guess shaped obviously the technology that we used. But we did approach it in a really specific way. Like, the cameras that we used were actually prototypes at the time, and they were sort of in pre-production. That relationship that we have with Oculus really helped. We sort of, they co-developed these cameras for this project, and the cameras were unique because they provided the highest resolution VR 180 capture to date with true IPD, which is our interpupillary distance, the distance between the center of our eyes, was basically matched with the distance of the center of the lenses or center of the sensors. And that provides a real like scale realism of the stereography of the environment, the depth of the objects within it. And the idea is really to like break down as many of the barriers between a virtual experience and a real experience as possible. So resolution, color accuracy, stereo accuracy, ambisonic sound, where each sound in the scene is actually tied to a physical place, and a rustle of a bush happens like exactly where that bush is and might attract your attention so that you would turn your head. And all those little elements were really designed around, I guess, we've done some research around efficacy of VR as a pain and anxiety management tool in, say, youth oncology using natural environments, and found pretty direct correlations between efficacy and level of, excuse me, and level of immersiveness. And so the idea was to just make it as accurate and immersive as possible while telling these conservation stories, and see if that would lead to a deeper connection with the narrative and with the place and with the people and the animals. So that was sort of why we chose that tool set. It was the best thing that wasn't quite available yet. And so we got to build a workflow around a new tool set, and got to test that immersiveness versus efficacy and behavioral change dynamic, which we feel was pretty successful in this piece. But I'm a big proponent of like not just telling things in VR for VR's sake. I think that the tool set really needs to be right for the job. And there was a lot of discussion around, why isn't it, some of the feedback is really like, why isn't it 360? And I don't know, I would argue that it doesn't need to be, and that by choosing 180, we were able to build, really interesting custom drones to hold it, with some partnerships here with XM2. And then we were able to, use easy rigs and gimbals and some things that allowed us to put the camera in places that you just can't get shots in 360, which I think led to much more impactful storytelling. You tell stories very, very differently in VR 180 as opposed to 360, as opposed to like traditional rectilinear 2D storytelling. And so I think what we were doing was really testing purpose-built, purpose-produced VR 180 conservation content to the highest quality we could, and seeing what emotional impact that might have. And I guess the Daryl's reaction and the reception of industry and film festivals has been a good validator that I think there's something there in that empathic storytelling in that VR 180 format. I'm not sure if that answers your question. But
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think it's actually kind of cool the way you said that, perhaps some people might have felt that you were limited by the 180 degrees, but a lot of times it's been said in art that when you're given a certain limitation, there's a lot more freedom, sort of counterintuitively, that comes within that, because you have certain, what do you call this, Greg? It's like, anyway, hopefully you understand what I'm trying to say, but
totally,
Greg definitely knows.
Yes. I mean, that's why photographers will, intentionally take it on to photograph in black and white, or yeah, accepting a discipline is often a doorway to freedom.
I couldn't agree more. My spare time out of working on VR, I spend shooting medium format film, and I'll generally, like, the last trip that I went on, I just took film cameras, and I had sort of 2 lenses, 2 bodies, handful of films, and the limitations there actually really promote a different way of thinking about the tool set and the artistic process as well. And like, yeah, it's funny because as a bit of maybe a remedy for my overexposure to the digital world, a lot of my spare time is spent like playing vinyl on rotary analog mixers and shooting medium format film, so like very limited, very analog processes, which I hadn't thought about too much, but yeah, they're definitely the antithesis of VR 180 content production.
Yes. Well, I know, not this past Lent, but Lent before, one of the things I did was to give up the use of social media and other electronic media, except as it came to profession or connecting with my family, and replace it with a lot more time spent outdoors, really attending to my surroundings. And one of the things that I found was that you know, the mind is very much a narrative language machine. And so it would begin, I would notice that the images and metaphors suddenly became full of the natural world, and specifically in terms of trees and plants, which is where I was focusing my attention. So you know, I would come up with vine-like metaphors or sprout-like metaphors, and it was just happening naturally just because of where I turned my attention. So
yeah, it's really interesting. It's almost like real-time neuroplasticity based on your environment, isn't it?
Exactly.
There's I mean, Tyson talks about, in a podcast, Tyson Young-Porter was talking about how, you know, we're so consumed by our devices in this digital world that, you know, you delete a couple of apps off your phone, take a hike in the woods for a weekend, and, you know, sleep out somewhere under the stars. And it's amazing how quickly you feel human again, were his words. And that rings so true for me. And I think that's something that, you know, we're back in lockdown here, and with people all over the world at the moment feeling, I think, more than ever disconnected from the natural world and sort of travel limitations and whatnot. It really is something to come back to, and something that I really hope that these tools will promote a desire for people to, you know, just get out, delete Instagram, delete Facebook, connect with the natural world. And even over a short period of time, I think it's so, like, here's the founder of a XR company telling everyone to put down their tech, delete all your apps, and go into that really is what it is. And even if you work in these industries, you'll never have the inspiration. Like a favorite phrase of mine is, inspiration will only ever fill the space that you create for it. And nothing fuels that more than the natural world. And yeah, I respect that, Greg. And I think that's a really important thing to do, is just to get back out into nature and let it form. It permeates your biome and your cognition in ways that are just absolutely magical, and you'd never expect. But it'll change your language and the way that you think and feel so quickly.
Well, I really like your description of how you're trying to work yourself out of your job. The idea, and I think I think you're doing a good job at that with that production, because like when I was transported in front of that man for the first time, I felt like I wanted to talk to him, like because I felt like he was right there, and I was like, you know, I was compelled to just strike up a conversation, and after it was done, I had this really a need to reach out. I reached out to you, but I felt this need to want to go visit them. Like, you know, so I think that, you know, that's one thing that I think this kind of, you know, compelling experience can do to help bring us together. And one thing I do like about Mark Zuckerberg's plans, from this podcast that I listened to recently, where he was talking all about his AR and VR plans with Facebook, which are extensive. He sees it as the next computing platform that he wants to dominate. Most of his focus is on the AR and on actually meeting people, connections with people. The idea of teleporting someone into your chair next to you, who's across the world, and being able to look at them directly in the eyes. And that eye contact aspect is super important for him. Some of that stuff, I'm like, yeah, if that's how VR is getting used, I'm all for it. You know, if we can, because really one of the main things we need to do as a planet is develop global self-awareness as a species. We have to basically, you know, completely neutralize any kind of sense of xenophobia, and you know, the best way to do that is to kind of meet each other. And if we can meet each other in these kinds of compelling ways using VR and AR, you know, hopefully that is the thing that will work you out of your job.
Yeah. One thing that just reminded me of that was listening to a talk that Cornell West did recently, maybe, I don't know, like a year ago or something. And he was talking about the differences between individuality and individualism, and individuality being, you know, expression, art, improvisation, freedom, whatever. And then individualism being this sort of selfishness, every person for themselves kind of attitude, and how important it is to make that distinction between individuality and individualism. And I've been thinking about that for like a year. And I think it's so interesting way to view the world. So I agree on that.
Do you think, Nora, that sort of ties into the resurgence of animism? And because we had such a, you know, 1500 years ago, we just had this incredible establishment of dualism through Descartes, and that whole space of assuming our position as, you know, above the natural world, and, you know, then creating hierarchies within and through that segregation within our own species. And I do feel like that we're returning back to more of an animistic sort of worldview.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know that much about that, but I definitely feel that there's going to be like a real kind of realization that everything that we enjoy on Earth has an origin in ecology. And that's something that George Monbiot talks about a lot too, is like just the need to understand ecology as the basis for everything, including, you know, obviously food and technology and government and just everything. And I think that possibly humanity is on a precipice of finally making that connection, but I still think there's a long way to go, because I think that our mentality and our health I think that we view the world as connected, but we're not able to take action that necessarily is in harmony with our thoughts. That's what I think. Like, a lot of people realize, oh yeah, we're trashing the planet. Okay, this is really bad. We need the Amazon. But I don't feel that people are necessarily able to actually change their behavior. Like, I think a lot of people, if you ask them, would probably feel that their actions or the systems that they live within are not in harmony with what they believe and what they think. So hopefully humanity can become more in harmony with itself, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So, yeah, really astute observation. I guess that comes back into the way that we accept the systems that define the societies that we live in at the moment. And that those systems aren't necessarily built on structures that honor that ecological origin of everything on the planet. It's kind of like talking about human-centered design is like, obviously it's really important, but what are we doing if we're not doing that? Are we designing for like a different species? It's kind of strange that there's now this like big refocus on making everything more human. It's kind of like, what was it before? And I think in the way that, you know, we're doing this incredible work at the moment with Joost Bakker, and he's got a project called Future Food Systems, which is an entirely zero waste housing project. And it's, you know, a house that for a 2-bedroom, I think costs about $350,000, because all the plans are going to be open source. And in Australia, for a house that size, it's, you know, a pretty like middle market value. And the whole structure is basically organic certifiable. So there's no toxins in there. It's one of the most fire retardant built from some of the most fire retardant materials that you can get. If it were to catch on fire, there's like no toxic sealants and things, and no PVC that will vaporize and become potently toxic in the environment. It can basically grow about 3 metric ton of food a year based off and grow that rich in nutrients from waste from the building itself. Catches all of its own rainwater, runs off solar. The tiles are made from recycled bricks and will earth you, so they're connected to the earth. They're grounded properly to the earth's magnetic field. So if you're barefoot inside, it's like being barefoot on the ground outside. And there's just like, the mushroom, there's a mushroom, like a bedroom and a bathroom and a mushroom, which is basically a big wall of edible mushrooms, which use the steam from the shower and the condensate from the hot water system to grow these like rich nutrient mushrooms, which are all just grown off sawdust and waste coffee grounds. And it's wild. It's just this project which takes like everything you could think of that's like a process based around consumption waste within your life. It sort of takes that and flips it and looks at the way that all your waste can become, the foundation of a new generation of ecology. And there's elements of that. It's just a modular system, and all the elements of that technology are available commercially, but no one knows about it. There's a company called Home Biogas, which make these things called biodigesters, which run off the same sort of microorganisms as in a cow's stomach. And you can basically feed in like human waste, organic waste, food waste, whatever you want. And out the other end, you get this incredible rich fertilizer, which you can grow really nutrient dense food from. And the off gas is completely harmless, odorless, and creates enough material to actually like cook with or run a gas hot water system from. And these systems are available, but no one knows about them. And building practices are sort of really like set in their ways. Like I live in an apartment building that was only built 12 years ago, and it's falling apart, and there's water leaking into everything. And the government like has no intention of holding the builder responsible, right? And on the other side, there's these incredible materials, incredible systems, which truly zero waste and truly sustainable, that are available and potentially cheaper. But there needs to be this awareness. And so that's actually like what I'm spending a lot of my time on outside of VR at the moment is our company works in the space of digital twin technology. So like creating digital sort of virtual instances of real physical spaces and then authoring rich content into those spaces. And they're much more ubiquitous because you don't need a VR headset to view it. You can view it on a phone, you can view it in a browser, you can really do it any way that you want. But then on top of that, like through some AR tech that we've got, if you are in the physical space, all that virtual content that you've authored can actually surface contextually aligned within that physical space persistently. So, you can walk back to the greenhouse project, which is on the banks of the Yarra River in the middle of Melbourne. And the idea is that people walking past will be able to get a really rich sense of all those systems and how they integrate and how they create a unique biome within this building. So I don't know, a lofty answer to your question, as I feel has been my MO today. But yeah, it's the systems are there and they exist, and there's thought leaders that are really like paving this way. We just need to find a critical mass and get a little bit more visibility around them, I think.
It's very encouraging to hear you say that. I remember one of the most profound experiences I had, and it happened in the space of like a blink of an eye. It was the first time I was in Hawaii, and we were walking in one of their national parks, and suddenly I saw this entire alternate view of human history in which humanity had engaged with the natural world in a completely different way, and they dwelled in genetically shepherded, not modified, but shepherded trees where the waste processing was very much designed in the way you described. And it was fascinating to see this whole, I mean, it was as rich and specific and detailed as as the physical world in front of me right now. And yet it was a complete alternate timeline for humanity. And so I'm really delighted to see that in fact some of these things may in fact become true.
Well, I mean, that's what the next season that we're hoping to make around Ecosphere is really all around custodianship, as I mentioned at the beginning. But working with Julie Watson, who authored an incredible book called Low Tech, which is essentially looking at tech in the sense of an acronym of traditional ecological knowledge and these technological ecological systems that First Nations people have been employing to live sustainably for millennia. There's this amazing community in Iraq which have this wild sort of grass which they use 100 different ways because it's in abundance, but to the point where they can literally make sustainable floating cities and houses that have not a single piece of wood, not a single screw or nail is hammered in, and they last for about 25 years, and it's an abundant resource. And so they just build as much housing as they need and no more than that. There's so many examples of humanity living in this symbiotic state of custodianship, and it feels sort of inherently opposed to our current way of doing things, but there has to be an intersection, really, because there's no way to do what we're doing sustainably. And I think that, funnily enough, the shirt that I'm wearing at the moment, not that you can see it, says the future is First Nations. And I don't know, I come back to that a lot. Like, there just has to be true acknowledgement and integration of First Nations cultural, communal and ecological practices, because that is, people have been living in Australia sustainably for 80,000 plus years. And to think that we've re-engineered the whole thing in like 500 years and nailed it is just kind of seems a little bit arrogant, like sort of like biomimicry, right? Like, you might iterate on a design 1 million times and then come back to it and you realize that nature did it right the first time.
Indeed. Yes. Well, we're kind of at the end of the hour. Any last thoughts from anyone?
Just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us, and now I'm really inspired to try your app. So I'm hopefully going to do that, and I'll definitely share it with my friends. And I think it's so cool what you're doing. So thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for your work.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and I really respect the work that you all are doing and your team. And my conversations with Daryl have been, highlights of my last couple of weeks here. So yeah, I really look forward to keeping in touch, and there might be some avenues to collaborate in the future. I think the intersection of immersive technology and distributed computing and blockchain, and the way that can provide, I think, more equitable and sustainable community models is definitely there. There's a lot to explore. So yeah, hopefully looking forward to staying in touch with you all.
Indeed. Awesome. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Thank you so much.